To start off this video, I'm not actually a huge fan of H.P. Lovecraft. This is mostly because of when the stories were written. English of those days is not fun to read out loud. It was very Shakespearean, so as a narrator, it's mind-numbing. You see, many of Lovecraft's works were published in magazines. Multiple authors would submit stories for these publications. Now, it was financially advantageous for a writer to fluff up their writings as much as possible. Essentially, how modern-day Redditors write no-sleep posts. You know, turning a mediocre one-page story into a monotonous five-page story because each paragraph is dedicated to over-explaining the details of unimportant things, like a doorknob, or car keys, or a mirror, or what they just flushed down the toilet. The reason authors of this bygone era chalked their stories to the brim with fluff is not because they wanted to show everyone just how well they knew the English language, though that might have been part of it. These days, a thesaurus replaces actual retention of words. It's because publications back then paid per word. So, instead of writing, "The bonfire burned brightly, the wood supplying fuel, glowing as it provided heat," they would write, "The monuments of oak wood immolated. The fuel they gave to the burning plasma caused the very fibers of the log to glow with a red-orange emission of light. The heat dispersed from the dancing flames thawed the dark, cold night, allowing all those around it to enjoy its majestic radiance of heat energy, giving us comfort as the full moon reminded us of the hour." Sound familiar? This is why Lovecraft's writing tends to be so long-winded. Like I said, I'm not a huge fan of Lovecraft's execution of writing. I respect his works, but they could benefit greatly from rewording and cutting down on length. Now, I'm also not into the deep lore of the Lovecraft verse. However, one does not need to be directly a fan to understand what Lovecraftian is. And let me tell you, most creepypasta that try to be that, fail. Here's why. Many writers think that simply having an eldritch creature and just looking at it makes you go crazy is Lovecraftian. It's not. There's a meme about Lovecraft's work being summed up as, "I cannot describe what this creature is, but it's so horrifying that you'll go crazy." That is how most people make their Lovecraftian monsters. However, you'll notice stories like Cthulhu, Dagon, Dunwich Horror, and more have descriptions of the monsters in them, and the characters that witness them aren't going insane because they looked at them. These characters go insane either by the entity influencing their mind, or the character, in their attempt to understand what this creature is, begins to go mad. It's not supposed to exist, but does. How? Saying, "It was far too strange to describe, and the mere presence of it caused me to lose my mind," is not scary. It's lazy. What makes the effects of a being like Cthulhu so chilling is that seemingly stable, logical people begin to go mad, either from Cthulhu talking to them in their sleep, or from trying to research the monster and coming to the conclusion that it is impossibly old and powerful, waiting to rule the world. This is what makes Lovecraft work: dread and not being able to trust your own sanity. Hypnos is another example of Lovecraft that most people don't even consider. There are no front and center monsters, only dreamscapes that give the characters experiencing them dread-inducing revelations. Lovecraft is about dread. The dread of the unknown. The dread of knowing that destruction is coming, and there's nothing you can do about it. Sure, you can have big eldritch monsters, but there needs to be more surrounding it than just that. We need a reason these creatures are terrifying beyond big or ugly. The reason most Lovecraft-adjacent stories fail to capture the essence is because the authors of these lackluster plots only know Lovecraft for the memes. Many times they don't understand what makes Lovecraftian horror tick, only that Cthulhu is a big squid monster and you might go crazy after looking at him. They don't understand the concept of Cthulhu, what he represents, why people go mad. Cthulhu is barely in his own story. It's about the effects this being is having on people who have encountered him, the build-up to seeing him, and the attempts to understanding what is going on. It's the revelations of what is happening that causes the insanity, that this impossibly old creature is destined to awaken again and take over the world. The dread of this inevitability. Dread is one of the harder concepts to execute in horror, as it relies on pure setup, things to come, rather than jump scares, blood, gore, and creepy faces. It requires characters to speculate on what might come in the future, the implications of this phenomenon. If you know this channel, you just heard me say a word that I have drilled into my own psyche. Implications. This is why many creepypasta fail when trying to execute on this idea. Most of these stories are small scale. Only 1 or 2 people are involved, and the monster in the story is some half-baked cryptid, because cryptids are far more immediately scary and therefore easier for the midwit to write. Now, you can do small-scale stories with dread, but if it's only the inevitability of the death of the main character, Oh no, barely fleshed out main character is gonna die. I was totally invested in their one-dimensional trait. Large-scale stories with long-term dread is what will get you effective Lovecraftian storytelling. Let's use some of my own stories for example. Casey's Vault. This one draws on the more shallow aspects of Lovecraft, given that the creature behind the vault door is some wall of flesh, tentacles, and so on. However, it does also have a psychological effect on those who encounter it, driving them crazy, encouraging them to bring it more sacrifices. Again, not the deepest form of Lovecraft. William's Purgatory, this plays more into that genre than most of my other stories. There is no singular creature, rather several paranormal aspects in strange locations. First off, the underground cave prison, which I took inspiration off The Dark Knight Rises. Nothing like that actually exists, as far as I know. Next, the warden of the prison. Rather than a physical entity, it is more like a psychological force, one that will make you go mad should you try to escape. But it is also what tests your mind in the exit tunnels. The light-starved, being humans who attempted to escape through tunneling their way out, the warden mutating them both physically and mentally to be more animalistic. Without a trace, Elliot Miles realizing that Slenderman is a much more widespread entity than just their town, as well as in Pursuit of Shadows, the entity possessing people is unknown what it truly is, where it came from, and how to beat it. Even the Amazing Man is technically Lovecraftian, an unknown being that seems to pop up in random places and consumes the souls of his patrons. These stories are examples of small-scale Lovecraft, very similar to the Dunwich Horror. Outside of these places, what's going on isn't going to affect the rest of the world very much. Some of it has the potential to, but it's far more character drama oriented. Some other creepypastas that actually do Lovecraft fairly well are stories like The Strangers. A character finds himself in an impossibly complex and unknown system of interconnected timelines and dimensions. Dust. In the heart of the Dust Bowl, something elemental is stalking and killing the local inhabitants. Quiet. Soldiers in World War II discover an ancient monolithic structure and are attacked by abhorrent creatures wearing the skins of their victims. By the edge of the water, a local cult sacrifices the main character's brother-in-law to bring forth an entity of unknown origins. Psychosis, a man slowly convincing himself there is a worldwide conspiracy at foot, controlling the masses, driving himself insane with his theories. On a hill, very similar to the Dunwich Horror, a local town is subject to a mysterious, violent entity that won't let its victims leave. Abandoned by Disney, especially the fourth entry, Corruptus, the sheer corruption of reality, bringing forth mutations of existence that the Disney Corporation is trying its best to contain. You'll notice, if you read enough Lovecraft, that these stories are usually centered on one or a handful of characters. You never have armies fighting Dagon or nukes being set off against Cthulhu. mostly because these were written before nuclear bombs were invented, but still. To give you one more example of Lovecraft I forgot to write earlier on in this script, in The Alchemist, it's a character fearing what they believe is a paranormal inevitability of their death. Howard Phillips Lovecraft understood that despite the cosmic scale of these creatures, it was in the small study room where the main character contemplated what these things are, is where the true horror lied. Our own mind is capable of driving itself mad. Our own mind is capable of questioning itself into dark places. Lovecraft isn't a giant squid monster that makes you go crazy. Lovecraft is studying a giant squid monster and driving yourself crazy with the inevitability of its approach. Lovecraft is also naming your cat